A lot of people say I shouldn't judge contemporary worship music because beauty is a subjective taste. Well, that is objectively not true. Hey guys, welcome back to KingdomCraft, where we build churches in Minecraft while talking about Christianity. I'm going to be working on my flower garden here. I want to add more flowers here, and I want to add like a big glass wall looking into the flower garden over here. While I talk about contemporary worship music and why I'm completely opposed to it. So this video will be in two parts. The first part will be explaining why beauty is objective. It's not just personal opinion or personal taste. And the second part will be exposing the dark origins of contemporary worship music and why it doesn't belong in traditional Protestant churches. Now, if you're part of a different denomination like Catholic, Eastern Orthodox, or non-denominational, it's really not my business. I'm mostly addressing denominations either that are mine or similar to mine. So we're talking Presbyterian, Lutheran, Anglican churches, things like that. But first, let's talk about beauty. A lot of evangelical Christians, a lot of Christians of all denominations these days, to be honest, have been influenced by the modernist idea that beauty is subjective. But really, according to classical Christianity, goodness, truth, and beauty are three transcendentals that are all objective because they're all connected to each other and all rooted in God's nature. That means goodness is objective. That means truth is objective. And that means beauty is objective. Now, the secular world opposes all three of those things. The secular world thinks goodness, truth, and beauty are all subjective. That's why the secular world will say, you know, there's your truth and my truth, but we can't say that there's a universal truth because that's sort of judgmental on other people's beliefs. And most evangelical Christians rightly point out that that's not true. Truth is truth. And if God says something is true, it is true, whether you think so or not. And the secular world tends to say morality is subjective. That's why they say you can do whatever you want as long as you're not directly harming anyone else, which that contradicts what they say because they believe in some sort of objective morality. They won't admit it, but still they will say at least that morality is subjective, and that's why they're opposed to any sort of moral legislation, whether it's about abortion or something else. And evangelicals rightly point out that morality is not subjective. There is such a thing as objective morality. If God says something is wrong, then it is objectively wrong, whether or not you personally think so. And people with a more, classical natural law theory would say that natural law can give us insights into objective morality as well. It's not simply a nominalist version of this is wrong simply because God declares it to be wrong and for no other reason. But evangelicals generally agree with the modernist idea that beauty is subjective. Like, they're perfectly solid on goodness and truth. They're probably the most solid when it comes to goodness and truth out of anyone. But when it comes to beauty, they suddenly become complete modern subjectivists. They say beauty is in the eye of the beholder, which is not the traditional Christian view. So, just because beauty is objective does not mean there is not a subjective experience of beauty. All of us would agree on that. Just because truth is objective does not mean there is not a subjective experience of truth. Your beliefs, what you personally think is true, that is your subjective experience of truth. But it's not identical with the truth. Your subjective experience of reality is not identical to reality. So likewise, your subjective experience of beauty is not identical with beauty. So just because you personally can think something is beautiful for you, because you personally enjoy it, because it is in line with your personal tastes, doesn't mean it's subjectively beautiful, and that's okay. There are a lot of things that I think are subjectively beautiful that are probably not objectively beautiful. Obviously, every man should subjectively think his wife is the most beautiful woman in the world, even though that can only be true for one woman in the world at most. And it's not something that people should even be trying to evaluate, because that would just lead to adultery. And obviously, subjectively, you would find your own home beautiful. Also, there are a lot of songs that, if you have nostalgia for them, they'll subjectively be especially beautiful to you, even if there's nothing objective about that song that makes it any objectively better than other songs. I can say that about a lot of songs that I've listened to. But that doesn't mean it's subjective. So, like, for example, My favorite classical music composer is Giuseppe Torelli, a random Italian Baroque composer that nobody knows about. But I'm aware that he's not objectively the best composer. I think objectively the best composer is Johann Sebastian Bach. So it's okay that there's a difference between what I think is subjectively beautiful and objectively beautiful. Obviously, I really enjoy Johann Sebastian Bach as well. He's the greatest genius, and as a little trivia fact, he was a devout Lutheran, very devout Protestant Christian, and incorporated his Lutheran theology into so much of his music. Sometimes when I mention that Bach was Protestant, some Catholics will be like, no, Bach converted to Catholicism. Wrong, Bach. That was his son, Johann Sebastian Bach, the famous one. He was a hardcore Lutheran Protestant his whole life. So, that Bach wrote a lot of church music, and that should tie into the church music that we should use. A lot of music that is used in Protestant churches today comes from Bach, because Bach wrote a lot of the best hymns. Bach was a Lutheran, so Lutherans write a specific type of music called chorales. You only really hear the word chorale in context of Lutheran churches. But he wrote a lot of just four-part melodies and harmonies, of course, that are used in a lot of Protestant churches today, and Catholic churches as well. Sometimes I'll hear Catholics saying, oh, Protestants don't have beautiful music, and then they will literally sing hymns written by Protestants. Most famous hymns that we know are actually written by Protestants, usually Anglican, Lutheran, or Methodist, or something like that. And all the denominations have a traditional style of worship that emerged from that denomination. And that leads into the second part of this video, which is why I think the origins of contemporary worship music are not good, and therefore traditional Protestants should not adopt it. So, every style of worship music, or every style of music in general, is not created equal. Every style of music emerges from a particular culture. Like, rock and roll music emerges from a rebellious culture, which is why I'm not against rock or anything. I just don't think it can be fused with Christianity. I don't think Christian rock can exist. I listen to secular rock, but I don't think Christian rock can exist because rock is all about rebelling against authority. It emerges from that culture. And Christianity is all about submitting to authority. Like, someone needs to write a rock song like, I want to submit to authority. Like, that makes no sense at all. So that's why Christian rock sounds like, I don't know, chocolate-covered broccoli. It's like two things that cannot be mixed. Christianity and rock. And that applies to, like, Christian pop, Christian metal. I know some people like Christian metal. I don't know. You get the point. Every style of music comes from a particular culture. And because every form of Christianity has a slightly different culture, there is a style of music particular to every form of Christianity. When you think Eastern Orthodoxy, you probably think Byzantine chants. When you think Roman Catholicism, you probably think Gregorian chants. And I think that when you think Protestantism, you should think traditional hymns written by people like Johann Sebastian Bach, because that is the traditional Protestant style of music. And the theological beliefs of these different denominations contributed to the differences in their music styles. For example, a lot of Catholic music, by the way, all Catholic, Protestant, and Orthodox, the traditional music for all of them is very beautiful, just in different ways. I believe that there can be objective beauty in various ways. I'm not denying that. But there are some things that lack objective beauty in certain ways. So, the Catholic music, like Palestrina, it's like Renaissance music, it's very polyphonic. Polyphony means a lot of voices sort of interlocking, but there's like counterpoint between the voices. There's like several distinct voices with several distinct rhythm patterns at the same time. That's what polyphony means. And it's really beautiful because the Catholic Church likes to have a lot of complexity in the music. And it is very beautiful. I am not denying that. Palestrina, if you listen to Palestrina, some of the most beautiful music you'll ever listen to. The Catholic Church legitimately has great music. I think Protestants have great music as well, though. I don't think it's an either or. I think it's a both and. So it's not like Protestant music is this, contemporary Hillsong, and Catholic music is this beautiful Palestrina. Because, like I said, Protestants have Bach, but Protestant music is beautiful in a different way. Protestant music is generally homophonic, meaning all the voices are singing in the same rhythm. Why is that? Well, Protestants emphasize congregational singing. They wanted the music to have a simple enough rhythm for the congregation to be involved in it, and they were critical of the Roman Catholic tendency to only have trained singers be singing the music in church. So it's a trade-off. The Catholic music is more complex, but it's harder for the congregation to sing it, whereas the Protestant music is at least more simple rhythmically, but simple is not antithetical to beautiful. You know, a lot of 20th century classical orchestral music, it's not simple or beautiful. It's ugly and it's complicated. It's just complete garbage if you listen to like Schoenberg or anything like that. It's most people don't know what this even is, because unless you're trained in classical music, you've probably never even heard this music. But everyone knows that like modern art is ugly, unless you're one of those hipsters. But everyone knows modern art is ugly, so just imagine that, but for music. It's completely atonal and stuff. So modern music sucks, and it's complex and ugly. So what I'm saying is that simple is not the opposite of beautiful. I will grant Protestant music, traditional Protestant music, is more simple than Catholic music. But I think it's just as beautiful, just in a slightly different way. No one can listen to a Bach chorale and claim it's not beautiful. Bach is more Lutheran music, but Calvinists also have music. Calvinists have the Genevan Psalter. I'll put a link to the Genevan Psalter in the bio. Go to genevanpsalter.com to listen to the Genevan Psalter. John Calvin and the early Calvinists believed you should mainly sing psalms in worship, and there's still some really strict Presbyterian denominations like the RPCNA that have that rule to this day. So because of that, John Calvin commissioned Claude Goudamel and Louis Bourgeois to set every single 150 psalms to music, and that still exists to this day. It's some of the most beautiful psalters, I think. And they also advanced the practice of 4-part congregational singing. And 4-part hymns are like the standard template for basically all choral music today. That originally kind of comes from the Protestant Reformation. In fact, if you look up the Wikipedia page for 4-part singing, the example they give is from the Calvinist Genevan Psalter. So I think that's pretty cool. That doesn't prove Calvinism or anything. I think that's just a cool bit of trivia. Now on to the origins of contemporary worship music. It doesn't come from Catholicism or Protestantism. It comes from one of the precursors to modern non-denominationalism, which is not Protestant because it's in the name non-denominational. It's not anything. It comes from the Jesus People movement. What was that? So the Jesus People was when a bunch of hippies from California converted to Christianity, but took a lot of their hippie beliefs with them. So what does that mean? I mean, I'm not saying that there was nothing good that came out of it. I'm sure some souls were saved through in that movement, and that's always good. But souls can be saved through a movement that is fundamentally not what we should emulate. There's always souls being saved in basically any church that's not explicitly heretical. I'm not claiming these people were heretical or anything, but I think their approach was not good. The Jesus People movement was a bunch of hippies converting from Christianity, but still keeping the hippie mindset of not liking religion. So what they started was a form of Christianity that was intentionally meant to not look like religion. You ever wonder where the phrase Christianity is not a religion, it's a relationship comes from? It comes from that type of culture, from the Jesus People culture that wants to try and separate Christianity from religion, that wants to create a kind of church that doesn't look like church. Fast forward about 20 years into like the 90s, and then you get these emergent church movements where churches will literally advertise themselves as we are not a traditional church. They'll advertise themselves as not your grandmother's church. Now, in Protestantism, you have a weird thing where there's traditional churches that are liberal, and there are conservative churches that are contemporary, but it's rare these days to find a church that's both traditional and conservative. Because obviously the PCUSA, which I'm in, is more theologically liberal than the PCA, but the PCUSA is still almost entirely traditional in its worship style, whereas the PCA is obviously a lot more conservative than the PCUSA, but the PCA is much more likely to have contemporary worship music, which comes directly from this movement of trying to create a church that doesn't look or feel like a traditional church, which I think is a pretty big problem. It's a problem if church offends you somehow. It's a problem if the holiness of God expressed through word and sacrament is somehow offensive to you. That is not something we should emulate. So the result of that is they formed a distinct style of music. Contemporary worship music like Hillsong and Bethel, it comes from this quasi-charismatic Jesus people movement from the 1960s in California that tries to make church not look like church. And that's also where Calvary Chapel comes from. I have very good friends who are like part of Calvary Chapel, and one of the most famous internet pastors, Mike Winger, who is good on many things. I'm not criticizing him. I think he's cool. But his denomination, I don't like how it started, because Calvary Chapel was part of this movement trying to make a church that doesn't look or feel like church. And I have friends in Calvary Chapel who tell me that one of their emphases is come as you are. You shouldn't feel like you need to dress up in a fancy way to go to church, but you would dress up in a fancy way to go to a wedding. Is the worship of God not more important than a wedding? It's like treating God casually is really not okay. And the whole, vibe of contemporary worship music is treating God casually. And it leads to, a lot of people have rightly pointed out, a more effeminate style of worship. Now, effeminate doesn't mean feminine. Femininity is not bad. Effeminate is a deprivation of masculine qualities from men, which is not a good thing. Effeminate is sort of weak and overly emotional, when worship music is supposed to be strong, bold, and holy. So, in a sense, even though the PCUSA mainline Protestant denominations in their beliefs and what they preach are a lot more liberal, I don't deny that, their worship style is a lot more traditional and masculine than most modern evangelical denominations. Seriously, so that's why it's a lot more complicated than mainline is liberal and evangelical is conservative. That's why I think we need to take the best aspects of both, either by retaking the mainline churches, which is, I think, the only realistic possibility, or somehow making evangelical offshoots more traditional, but I don't think that's logically possible. You can't make a modern thing traditional. That's like trying to turn, brand new wine into like 20-year-old aged wine. It doesn't work like that. You can't manufacture tradition out of thin air. So that's why I think retaking the mainline churches is the only option, even though it's also impossible. But it's logically possible. It's just practically impossible. I don't know. There aren't really good options these days. We're in a dark age. But even so, the holiness of God is very important. And contemporary worship music itself does not capture that. Now, I am more than certain that there's plenty of people who sing contemporary worship music that personally care about the holiness of God, but they just don't understand the cognitive dissonance, that the style of worship music that they're promoting is not in line with that and comes from people who do not agree with that. Now, some people might say it's the genetic fallacy. It's not the genetic fallacy if it still has an impact on the thing today. And I think even though it's a fallacy to discount something solely on its origins, it still gives insight into why contemporary worship music sounds and feels the way it does. I think once you understand it, it's hard to unsee it. So that's just a short overview of why I don't think we should have contemporary worship music in traditional Protestant churches. Now, if you are part of Calvary Chapel, if you completely 100% agree with its founding philosophy, then by all means, it would make sense for you to support contemporary worship music. But for those of you who are running, a PCA church or an ACNA church, something that's traditionally Protestant, there is no good reason for you to support contemporary worship music. It needs to die. We need to be singing traditional hymns and psalms, and I know it is hard for people to hear that. I know it can sound harsh and judgmental, but the reason so many young people, especially young men, are converting to Catholicism and Eastern Orthodoxy is because they recognize the obvious truth that we need a traditional, beautiful style of worship. That's just obvious. And, of course, the reason we should have this style is not for the pragmatic reason of it will convert people. That's a bad reason. The reason we should do it is because it reflects the holiness of God. That's what's most important, that it glorifies God. Christianity should not be stereotyped as having bad music. That does not look good for Christianity's witness to the world. And Christianity was always stereotyped as having the best music in the world until very recently with the advent of this contemporary style. So thank you guys for watching. I'm going to speed this up while I do some more work on my garden over here. And as always, I will see you guys later.